Yeah, it should be available on all the major platforms, and we'll have it where you can download it on YouTube or whatever as well. So we'll try to make it as accessible as possible. And Will and I are both very active on social media, and we're planning to leverage that because another aspect, I don't know if we've even mentioned this on the air. One thing that I've tried to do since I've been engaging folks with science is just make it accessible.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
provide you a link. I'm not trying to hide anything. Here's the paper that I got information from. So we're trying to go through, and it's going to be a tall order for this, and we're trying to work it out, but we're trying to go through every single mention of a study that we have in the podcast. We will have a paired post on social media where you can kind of get a summary from our words, but also a link to it if you want to go read it yourself. Trying to just make it as transparent and as we can. So we're trying to pair those things so that people can give us feedback, whether it be through social media or wherever they, there are lots of different ways that they can give us that feedback. We've kind of tinkered around with the idea of even having some live
Yeah.
shows where people can chime in and be part of the conversation or the argument, whatever they want to contribute to that. And if people give us feedback and they want us to go down that route, then we might do that too.
Transparency and communication has always worked for me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what we're trying to do here. We're all in this together. We all want more turkeys. So
Well, I am certainly excited, and let's tell everybody again. The name of the podcast will be Wild Turkey Science. It launches this Sunday. Am I correct? January the 23rd.
Yeah, we plan to roll out just a simple overview kind of introductory episode on Sunday night. That's going to be January 22nd. And
Okay.
then we're releasing our first, 3 full-length episodes on the 23rd, the morning of the 23rd at, I think it's set for 6 a.m. Eastern time. Is that right, Marcus?
yeah, I believe
And
so.
and then the plan thereafter is that we're going to launch a new episode weekly.
Okay.
Yeah, so it should be really continuous content.
Assuming this does work and is successful, that it's because it's meeting a need that hasn't been met, by trying to pull all this information kind of into one place and help people understand more about what's going on with turkeys, why decisions are being made the way that they are, and the things that they can do to get involved and help out.
And you got so much communication with other states. I think that's the most exciting part. You're gonna know what's going on in Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi, Arkansas, everywhere. Y'all will
Yeah.
have your people in all of those states contributing to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. That's the plan. And I think that the reason that that's so important is because, there's a lot of good information I mean, turkeys in Mississippi aren't that much different from turkeys in Alabama or Georgia or lots of parts of Florida, South Carolina. So, by pulling bits and pieces of information, maybe we don't have that exact piece of data for Alabama, but hey, look, we got this in North Carolina that kind of answers the same thing. And we can start to pull that together and the picture becomes clearer.
Another real benefit of that is when we start putting it all together like that, then holes in what we know become really obvious.
Yes.
And it already has in a couple of areas where we're covering things. Like we have some major holes that we need to address.
Holes that have never been addressed.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of those that, is surprising to us and expected that it's going to surprise a lot of people is how really poor quality data we actually have on poult survival. That's a major hole in the literature right now that we're trying to address.
Well, I'm glad I'm fixing to ask y'all a question I've been asking David Hawley for 5 years when he comes up with that hen to poult ratio number. How in the hell do you get that number? Who makes that decision? I've never been able to get that answer.
So you want to know how did we decide what poult to hen ratio we need?
Three was the magic number for David. He said, and if it's under 3, he panics. Where's that number? How do y'all get that number?
That is so awesome that you asked that, Big Daddy, because we actually questioned whether or not that magic 3 was the right number on one of our episodes that we've already recorded, and we had a
Yeah.
conversation about that. And why does it have to be 3? Because because intuitively in my mind, and remember, I have a PhD, but I have a background as a hunter. I'm a simple man. I'm from Alabama too. And I think if a hen has one surviving poult in her life that's a female, she's replaced herself. And if she produces another gobbler and she produces a hen, then that population is growing.
Yeah.
So it's not that intuitive that it's got to be 3 every year. And we had a conversation about that.
Yeah, and I think one to answer your question, for one thing, we've asked a couple of scientists about that, and they actually didn't agree on it. I don't remember if you remember that, Will.
Yeah.
That they know, they are the people that know, and they were a little bit in a different place on what that number needed to be. But so, from a simplistic standpoint, you're looking at, oh, she needs to replace herself with one hen, and a gobbler. So now we're at 2, right? And there's a lot of other things that are going on. One, that the nest itself has a really low probability of hatching, and then the poults have a low probability of living. So she might have to produce quite a few poults, or she may have to lay quite a few nests before she actually replaces herself with one poult, or one of each sex, and then they have to survive to also reproduce and go through that same gauntlet. So the I wouldn't say consensus, but the current thought is she really needs to produce 3 per hen on a year by year basis for her to, on average, replace herself over her lifetime, given how likely they are to die in all the different parts of their life. So she's not really replacing herself unless her offspring also replace themselves, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I totally understand that. But what my question has always been is, how do you come up with that number, that hen to poult ratio? Who counts them? How do you do that?
Oh, how do you actually know how
Yeah.
many?
How do you get that number?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of states, it's roadside surveys with biologists. They're driving around out there all summer, and they keep a log sheet in their truck. And every time they see a brood, they're writing down the number of hens they see and the number of poults they see, and that's where it's derived from.
Well,
And
I've always said they need to include the private landowners in that.
Yeah.
I think a turkey hunter, the
Yeah.
more points you can get, I think the better you
Yeah.
will be.
Well, in some states, Florida is one of them. We have a survey that we send out to the hunting community, and they report, anytime they see a hen with poults, they report, the number of hens and poults together. And, from a research standpoint, we also have done it in various ways, but the most common historically has been to do a flush count. I wouldn't recommend you go do that on your property, but from a research standpoint, it gives us a good handle when we flush a hen with some poults when they're a little bit older. We can get a count of how many were with her at that point. So there's a lot of ways that you can get at that data, and some of the states are doing exactly what you said, which I wholeheartedly agree with you, trying to include the turkey hunting public, because there's a lot of eyeballs out there that care a lot about
That's right.
turkeys.
Yeah.
And, if you're in one of those states like Florida that have a survey, take the time to do that. That data is really valuable, and it's helping us to figure out how things are going with turkeys and what decisions need to be made. And that ultimately affects all of us. So, take time to do your part if you're in a place where you have a survey like that.
Absolutely. Well, thank y'all for covering that. And I'm sure that's just a sample of what y'all's podcast is going to be like. Just that conversation we just had about the hen to poult ratio count.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So,